Hey there, you found Off the Water, the premier kayak fishing show for the Gulf Coast. We interview the best anglers to find out what they did, where they went, and what they used. Fishing reports, cool products and accessories, upcoming kayak tournaments, kayak safety, rigging tips and tricks, sponsor highlights, club member specials, and more, all on Off the Water, live and podcast. And now, here's your host of Off the Water, Mr. Sean Rastanis.
Yep. All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you for coming out to the Backpacker here in Baton Rouge. First of all, thank you to Jared, Tyler, everybody here with the Backpacker crew for letting us take over their second story here in Baton Rouge. We got food and drinks and everything available for everybody. Thank you for everybody who came out. We have a couple guest speakers tonight, Brendan and Steve. They're going to go over some tips and tactics tonight for Paddlepalooza. We have Paddlepalooza coming up March 12th. It's going to be hosted out of Empire Marina in Empire, Louisiana, down Highway 23. A little bit different this year. Typically, we fish Highway 1 in the fall. You know, Hurricane Ida did some damage down there, so we had to make a couple changes to the tournament lineup this year. So that's going to be one of the first changes this year. So we wanted to take the opportunity, pull some pro kayak anglers over here, and hopefully give us some information to help everybody out in the club on catching fish for Paddlepalooza. And we're live streaming this across Bayou Coast, and we'll be posting it up later as a podcast and a video for everybody who's not able to join us tonight. But we have a pretty good turnout tonight, so really appreciate y'all showing up. So I'll let Steve and Brendan come on up and take over.
Steve, I think if we stand right here, we're both in the camera.
Oh, yeah, it's got a good range. You can see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're looking forward to one of the best events in kayak fishing, especially the Gulf Coast. The bass fishing is absolutely fun, but we still, all of us love our coastal saltwater fishing. And we hope to give some good information tonight so that more people can feel like they have a really good opportunity to catch fish and be successful. So this is going to be open, especially towards the end. We brought some lures. We've got some tackle. We can talk about some fishing knots. Some lures, some different tricks and tips that might help you out.
So, yeah, pretty exciting for me is that we're fishing Paddlepalooza, an event that's usually down Highway 1. This year, because of the hurricane, we're shifting locations. We're going back to Empire, where we just had fallen tide, and so it's an area that most people have fished before, but they haven't fished it at this time of year. So luckily, between the years and the decades, me and Steve have gone there this time of year and kind of will share some of our advice. I'm sure you guys have had success there. I know a lot of the guys out here fished for a long time, so and a lot of these guys know Plaquemines Parish like the back of their hand. So
Absolutely. Well, we're going to talk about the whole highway from top to bottom, maybe some places to go and some conditions that each place is going to offer. And that's going to help you put a plan together, especially if we have different weather conditions, and that's what's important. So you can't just say, well, I have a spot. I'm going to go to that spot. And if you do, and the wind's blowing the wrong way, your spot may be no good. So you have to have alternate plans, and that's what we're going to try to provide for you here.
this tournament, being a slam tournament, it's very important to manage your time, to kind of know what historically is a good fish, an excellent fish, and a fish that you can live with to progress to the next species, because you only have a certain amount of time. And I think it's almost as important for being a successful tournament angler to know when to hold them and when to fold them, as opposed to, like, if you can catch the biggest trout or the biggest red among your peers, you got to know when that's good enough to move on to the next one. We're trying this. I think this one is going to be a weigh-in tournament, right?
Yes.
So we're going to shift away from the ruler and the and the catch boards and all that stuff. Back to the old school, catch them and eat them style, Bayou Coast tournament. And so flounder, always the tricky one. Obviously you want to throw some lures that are going to be on the bottom. You probably want to pick some areas that you're fishing that don't have a lot of aquatic grass so you can get it to the bottom. Fishing slow. Fishing. Are we going to have bait at this tournament?
Live bait, I think, is allowed.
Okay.
I think, Jonathan?
Yeah.
Yeah, live bait's
Live bait is allowed. So, Cockahoe minnows certainly are, crack for the flounder.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. Yeah.
It's no shame. You're competing for prizes that are worth lots of money. So no shame, no grudges held if you stoop to using the cockahoes. So I know I've done it. I know several people who've won have done it. A few. Redfish, typically I like to, you're going for weight, not length now. So you want to fish in areas where you find fatter redfish. I usually like to fish in aquatic grass kind of areas. Those tend to have a little bit more shoulders on them. If you kind of find the more ocean going, big bay reds, they're kind of long and slender and, not eating as much crustaceans and stuff and getting kind of bulky.
So Brendan's talking about some of the areas. And to expand on that, let's talk about flounder. I have caught some hammer flounder down Highway 23. One year I caught one that was so big I just couldn't believe it. Well over 20 inches, super wide, just giant. The day before Paddlepalooza or Fallen Tide, the day before. Didn't tell anybody until the day after. So I had to hold that secret for a while. But I was really mad that I caught that fish because I said, oh, that looks right. And I made the cast and I could almost not stop myself, just sort of like looking at a car wreck. You just can't stop yourself. I made the cast and bam, he hit. I went, no. And so I pulled back and it was a giant flounder, So some of the areas that you're gonna target for flounder. Flounder, in my opinion, they like those mud bottoms where they can blend in. If you have that slime grass bottom, I just don't find that I catch as many flounder in those situations. So if you're in a habitat where you have a lot of slime grass and all, that may be the area where the edges of that where you have that excellent red fishing. But you may not have the flounder there. So you may have to look at the nearest bayou, the nearest point where you have a drop off or a little ditch that is clean. That is the areas, in my opinion, that you would want to target those flounder. Ditches are excellent. Little gravelly shell areas are excellent. Areas where they can get an ambush and they like just the slightest bit of current or an area where it's draining out of a marsh. Those are all good. And wood, if you find a piling, any kind of a piece of piling or something, it's always worth making a cast. This side, this side, this side, this side. Okay, nothing there. There's another piling. Let's go do the same thing again. It's kind of monotonous. And flounder fishing drives a lot of people crazy, but really, really focusing on when you're flounder fishing on that getting to the bottom is the key, in my opinion.
Fishing areas that have a lot of structure around the water, areas that you see a lot of minnow activity. I know that you cannot not always see that, but like if you're seeing a lot of small bait fish in the area, especially like cockahoes that are on the bottom, that's always a good place to target. You want to slow it down. If you find one of those areas that looks really perfect, it's almost better to spend the 20 minutes just blanketing, casting that area than moving on and trying to find these perfect kind of Goldilocks scenarios. Once you find one of those, you really need to hit it hard. Let's say if this, flag was a flounder, you need to make sure that your line is crossing every single location of it. You can't just hit it 1, 2 and go, because that flounder could be here. He's not going to see that lure over there. They're very zoned in on their absolute super location. So,
and when we talk about, okay, that's the type of habitat that I'm going to be looking for my flounder. Now, I need to find a redfish. So looking for grass and all that is good. And that's absolutely is your summertime pattern. You want to look for grasses in the summer. You want to look for water that's clean enough that you can see them. You stand up, you watch them tail. We have some excellent anglers that are just masters at sight fishing. Jonathan, you just taught me so much about sight fishing just with a few questions. So ask people who are good at sight fishing and they'll always give you some tips. But the thing is, in the winter, you're not always going to be able to do the same things that you do in the summer. And this is key. Oysters can be the thing this time of year. You have an oyster patch that's off the bank, that is where I'm going to be targeting redfish if I don't see one. If I'm looking around and I'm not seeing them, I'm going to look for oysters. Places where I think oyster beds are going to be, I'm going to throw a lot of jigs because I want to feel those oysters. And when I do, that's going to be the area that those redfish are going to be this time of year, I feel like.
Quick question, guys, on the flounder. This time of year, it's early March. Are they heading in or are they heading out?
And
So they're coming in from the Gulf. Now, I've heard that there's also basically flounder that just don't leave.
there are resident flounders.
resident
Absolutely. See, a lot, it's just like trout. There are stories that we hear from a lot of guys in the summer who will catch a 5 or 7 pound trout in the middle of a redfish pond in June or July in the middle of summer, way up in Pointe-au-Chien or way up in Sulphur Mine or something like that. Places where, they migrate, don't they? Some stay back for whatever reason. No, I don't know why, but there's just a few. Now, flounder, there are a few that stay behind. Maybe they're males. Maybe the females are gone. Maybe a few big males stay behind. Hey, if I catch a 16-inch, I don't care if it's a female or a male. I just want, that's a nice flounder, so I'm bringing it in. So there may be some that stay behind for that reason. Maybe some are males. But also, if you have the right habitat, like Lake Calcasieu, we're not fishing Calcasieu for this tournament, but Lake Calcasieu has that little bitty narrow pass. But for whatever reason, a lot of flounder winter in Big Lake area. Maybe they spawn in the channel, I don't know, but they stay in Big Lake area all winter long, a lot of them. So there may be some areas on 23 where you're going to find flounder year round. And that's great for us. Hey, that's a positive for Paddlepalooza. I think we're going to have more flounder caught on the 23 corridor this time of year, Paddlepalooza, than we would have or last year we had 0 flounder caught on the LA.
We'll definitely have more.
We will have more than that. We will have more than we have averaged the last 4 or 5 years. So I think it's a positive.
Can I ask if you think that they'll be further south simply because if they're coming in from the Gulf at that point?
There are some that stay up north. That's the thing. It's sort of like the Lake Calcasieu thing. They stay up in that cleaner water by the oysters. I don't know if it's males that stay up there, but there are some flounder that stay way up north. And I think now that is an interesting point that we wanted to talk about. If you're down south and you get some Gulf flounder that have already spawned, they spawn offshore, it's unbelievable how far offshore flounder go. There are flounder that go out to 100 foot of water. They'll go 10 miles offshore in the Grand Isle block. They'll be way out at rigs that are accidentally caught in the winter by commercial fishermen. If those flounder go way out there, they spawn, then they come back in. Can you catch some that are coming back in this time of year? Absolutely. They trickle out. When do they go out? They don't all go out in the month of November.
First week of December.
Some go out earlier, some go out middle, some go out later. Some of those early ones coming back in, absolutely. You could catch some around Empire that are coming back in, and they could be big females that you want, big 20-inch monster flounder. So yes, you could catch some coming back in.
For years and years, I fished the Highway 1 bridges before I had a kayak, and I would, usually start right as hunting season was ending. Well, before I kayak fished, I did a lot of duck hunting. So duck hunting would wrap up in January, and I'd start fishing in February off those bridges. And I'd fish really slow because it was cold, and I was trying to catch big trout. but I'd also catch a lot of big flounder, and they were all seemed to be coming in that February timeframe, that middle February. I almost always catch a nice flounder when I would go fish off those bridges in February, and it just leads me to believe that they were starting to come in from that spawning time when they left in December, and they kind of come back in the middle of February.
Now, so we've talked about some areas, and what about the canes? Highway 23 is full of canes. Yeah, I think you can find patches along canes that are sweet spots, and I still think you can absolutely catch all three on canes, especially when you get down towards from Joshua's on south. You got a lot of canes. If you find the right little spot, right little divot, yes, you can have a flounder laying in there. Absolutely. So the only problem that you may find is that you might have a little dirtier water around some of the canes because they tend to be more facing the open Gulf. So I think they're weather dependent. If you had several days of calm weather going into it, you may find fish right pushed up against the canes, and they're clean enough water, you can smoke them. So
fishing around the canes is also problematic because you have a lot of canes that are laying down by the canes, and if you fish on the bottom, you need to fish with something that's very weedless because you're asking to hook a piece of cane.
Absolutely.
Or a piece of broken off cane root, which is really problematic.
Let's talk about trout. Our favorite fish, or some people, the master of trout. So we have fish for trout. All of us fish for trout. We love fishing for them. I do myself. But to me, I get more frustrated with trout than anything. I'll set up in an area. They're on this particular point. I've got them figured out. I go the next day, gone. Why is that? I just don't think we have the numbers of trout that we once did. I think they move a lot with boat traffic and boat noise. The deal is about trout is I think you need to scout and you need to look for them, but don't get locked in and assume they're going to be exactly there the next day. I can tell you one example. I fished a lake over by the Lake Hermitage area, not the lake itself, but I was out west. I had a spot the day before falling tide. I had fish just every cast topwater. I go back there for the tournament and could not buy a fish. The fish were a few miles the other direction, and everyone was mopping up. The fish had just migrated with the tide. It seems like the whole biomass of trout had moved in with the tide. And I'm still fishing the same spot. There's that spot mentality. Don't get locked in on a spot. If they're not there, you give it a nice effort and you throw, like I always talk about, throw some topwater, see if you get some eager big fish. Throw something in the middle, some suspending baits. Throw some bottom, some jigs. And if if you don't get anything there, give it several casts, work it, and move on. There's a reason you're not catching something. Maybe pass back by it later, but those fish may have moved off. And just keep your mind open that, hey, they may be a couple hundred yards away or they may be a mile away. So I need to start hunting for them. And just slice your area up, use your favorite stuff, top, middle, bottom, and then move on. So trout can move faster than the other two. The other two sort of stay in an area and they lock into an area, and it's, if your wind is good and your water's clear enough and all of these conditions are just right, your redfish should pretty much stay in those areas. Your flounder really will stay in those areas because the flounder is not going to move a whole lot around. If he's got a good ditch he likes, he's going to stay there. But your trout, man, those things are mobile. I mean, they just boom, boom, they move all over. So keep an open mind on trout. As far as lures, Brendan's a master. I got a couple techniques, but Brendan can tell you a lot of good information on trout.
This March time of year, I really like to fish windblown banks. You're talking about a lot of pogies that are this big or little brown shrimp, and those little tiny creatures kind of get thrown with the wind, they have no way to fight against that current. They can literally just pile up by the thousands against some of these wind-blown bank positions. Use that wind. It's a tournament day. There's probably going to be some wind. So, utilize that to your favor. And don't get worried about that being so dirty. It's helpful if you can find a cleaner bank that's windblown, but always fish those windblown banks, especially if it's like a big wide bay that eventually can gather all that bait in that bay and push it against one little area, especially if that looks like a fishy area, a place that you've caught fish before. Throw some topwaters against that windblown bank with all that chop in it. Throw some plastics and let it sink down in there. I've had times in March where I've went against a windblown bank that I fished the whole rest of the pond on the calm side, did nothing, went to the windblown bank and was literally catching them every cast. And it's really fun when you can hit it like that. And it makes so much sense when you get over there, you see the bait, you catch the fish, you bring it to the cleaning station, you open it up, and it's just spilling out with little pogies and little brown shrimp. And it kind of works. So always look for those windblown banks this time of year.
We had that trout tournament down in St. Bernard in March, Trout Challenge a few years back. And we were fishing an area. There was no trout. We went like 100 yards, 200 yards to an area where the wind was blowing against the bank. And it was 4 or 5 of us. And it was almost every cast was a trout. And we caught 3 and 4 pounders out there on top water under cork. But they were only against that wind-blown bank. As soon as you got into the protected area where it looked really beautiful and calm, where you thought, hey, this is a great place, nothing.
Right. And that's a good point, Sean, where you got to make that adjustment quick. If you're on an area and, hey, I've caught them here before, that does not mean they're going to be there. Those dudes will circle around. They may be on the complete opposite side, a couple hundred yards away, doing something else. So be mobile, move around. And, there are days when there's some strategies where you can get into an area and you can lock yourself in, and that will absolutely win things. It'll win championships. It'll win a lot of tournaments over time. You always see a guy who is going to get into an area and really methodically just do it right and make every decision right. But that doesn't always work, and neither does running and gunning. So you have to make that decision, and you have to assess where you're at and fish your area and to make that decision yourself. Do you want to stay there and wait for them, or do you want to move around and hunt for them? And sometimes working really hard pays off. And so there is no magic formula. One thing works for one guy, something else works for another guy. And it just depends on the weather, the conditions, and everything. And that's why there's no perfect formula for fishing or for golf or for anything like that. It's just you go out, and that's why it's fun. We don't have the perfect formula, but working hard to me has been my part of my success. Is I just go and I hit my top, middle, bottom. Okay, they're not here. Move to the next spot. Top, middle, bottom. Move on. I just have that mindset.
And don't get stressed out if you haven't caught a fish and you've caught them in the past where you're fishing very slow, methodically, and then all of a sudden you get frustrated on tournament day and you just start and you just start like getting angry. I mean, that is gonna just sink you. So just kind of right. Calm down, take out your lunch, reassess the situation. Count to 10 or whatever you need to do and just kind of calm your nerves.
I love seeing guys fishing different techniques who are successful. And like you'll see this really nice stringer come in and it is caught with something completely different in a completely different area than the next guy, and they're just neck and neck. And it's just enjoyable to see that with our sport. So it can be done many different ways. Preparation, that's another part of it though. This guy who fishes this way in this area and this guy who fishes something completely different, there's a common denominator I feel like with guys who are successful. Preparation. I don't want to show up with my old line on my reels. Look, I'm spending a lot of money to fish a tournament. And if I'm going to show up to the tournament and I don't put $5 worth of line on my reel and I'm fighting it all day long, I've set myself up for failure. So set yourself up for success. Go through your stuff, get it properly, all your reels right, get everything right. When you go out there on the water, you're not going to fight all your equipment. That is the one thing that is going to sink more people than anything else, is fighting with their equipment. You want your equipment to work for you, not against you.
I think,
hey guys, we have a question on Facebook. Someone wants to know the water depth this time of year that you can be fishing in for flounder or trout.
I would say that it's going to matter the temperature and like the preceding 3 or 4 days of temperature before that. But I would say that, 3 feet-ish is going to be, where I'm going to be fishing most of my day.
Do the flounder tend to go deep like trout will when it gets cold?
I mean, I will catch flounder in March this time of year. Like if I find like a sponge marsh where like there's lots of little clumps of grass, and it's like where you can like literally get in there and just kind of move your rod around, or like if you find like a structure of pilings and bulkheads, and then you can just kind of literally take your kayak around and kind of cane pole and drop all the little spots. Same thing with marsh. You have some of these places where you get in and it's shallow, but I like to find the marsh that has the steeper banks against the grass, if that makes sense. You have some marsh where you get to and it's like the mud is almost coming out of the grass. And then you have some marsh where it's almost on a little pillar, and there's like these kind of little deep little holes, and you can just kind of jig around there. And I kind of have learned areas over the decades of fishing that I'm just kind of like, okay, that's a good steep kind of marsh area, and I can fish that.
The biggest thing to me is that relationship between shallow and deep water. When you have a front come in and it drains your marsh, those fish have to have an exit. And if you have a deep water area nearby, those little ditches, those little areas that are near deep water, to me, are going to be the most successful in your fish that don't travel far. Your flounder aren't going to travel far, but they're going to move off your edges off of a drop off. But those fish are almost uncatchable. I mean, when these fish move up to feed, that's when they're catchable. And your redfish, they'll drop off, and whenever that you have that warmer weather and that sun hits those oyster patches, they'll move up shallow. Now, I don't find as many redfish super shallow like I do in the summer this time of year. I just find them out where they're almost out of sight or can't see them at all, but I know the oysters are there. So I think the relationship to deep water is what's important. Cold water, super cold trout.
Steve was talking about preparation, and it just made me think back. We shared a room at Worlds, and every night we would get back and we would have to sit there and tie with FG knots, probably for 2 hours. It was crazy. We would like take all of our poles, get all this 80-pound fluoro, and just sit there and just tug with the line in our teeth and retie all of our rods, FG knots, like all night, just because, I mean, you're there. And I think it was like 5 days in a row.
Right.
It was, I mean,
you don't want to make a mistake. You don't want to lose a fish because you didn't have your tackle prepared. And so we went, we put the maximum effort into tackle preparation. We spent months ahead of time thinking about what lures we could bring, the right line, the right everything. And and that's what I think if you just have that mindset that I'm going to prepare all my tackle. Hey, if I'm casting in my front yard, people know, hey, he's an angler, he's a fisherman. He may be crazy, but he's out there casting his stuff in his front yard, but he might be ready. I mean, I I will cast stuff in the front yard and make sure it's right. I'm going to test it out. I'm going to put longer leaders on. If I'm going to use braid to a leader, I'm going to use a longer leader so that I'm thinking about the day. I'm not going to use a 3-foot leader. I'm going to use a long leader so that, hey, I'm cutting off a foot here. I had a nick. I'm going to cut off some more so that I maximize my time on the water. I'm not having to retie a leader on there. So those are the kind of things that I do.
Your leader should almost go
Rod
from when you're, got a good hook keeper. So whenever this is a short leader because I've had to cut it. So basically, if you have your lure at casting length off the tip, your leader should almost go right before it wants to wind into the reel. So like you have that whole length of leader. So throughout the day, you can get it to where it might be about here at the end of the day after you've changed a few lures. You want to start with a really long leader, carry lots of different sizes of leaders depending on what species it is.
Well, yeah. Now, some people do, like Jonathan said, some people use straight braid.
Nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that, especially when you're targeting just redfish. If you're in those situations where you do find some clean water, and it may make a difference on a big, nice trout bite. So that's all about that whole how particular are you with your equipment. I'm going to throw a leader if I'm throwing trout. I think their eyesight is very good. I feel like I get more bites. Flounder, I still throw a leader. Contrary to, I think what a lot of people think, they think the braid is more abrasion resistant, but braid cuts very easy. If you put a piece of fluorocarbon leader on, it is much more difficult to cut. You can take it and rub it against something and then rub a piece of 20-pound or 30-pound braid. I'm talking lighter braid, not the 65, but you push some lighter braid against a piece of anything metal and it just cuts really easy, whereas your fluorocarbon is super hard to cut. So I'm going to use that for flounder. That is my setup. I'm going to use at least a 20-pound leader, and I'm going to use tie that to 20 or 30-pound braid, and I feel like I get more bites. There are people, again, a variety of methods. There are people that use straight mono and are extremely successful with it, really good anglers. So one thing may work for one guy. I think it stretches too much for me. If I make a nice 40, 50-foot cast and something hits, you have to really pull back to really try to bow the rod over. Or when my daughter was about 10 years old, I had her go way out there in the yard and hold my line. I had some mono on, and I pulled it. And I said, "You got it?" She says, "Yeah." I pull it harder. I said, am I going to pull it out of your hand? She says, "No, you're hardly pulling at all." And I pull really, really hard. And she says, "Okay, I still got it. You can't pull it out of my hand." So, but you put braid on there, and it's a different story. So you just set your tackle up for the right lure, the right situation. I feel like you're more successful.
If you're working at top water all day with mono, I think you probably have to move your rod this far each time. And if you have braid, you just kind of have to, twitch it barely.
Yeah.
So
after we have some, I have a couple lures in here, and I have some braid, I have some mono, and I can tie up some different knots. If anybody would like to see them, feel free. But let's talk about
the spots.
Okay, spots. All right. Where to go?
So when you think about Highway 23, and the question was asked earlier, like, do flounder come in, towards the Gulf? 23 is quite different from Highway 1. Highway 1 definitely has a coastline and definitely has like a distance from the coastline you can measure. You can say basins or gators or whatever we call it, and that would be the furthest spot from the coast. And then 23 is a different animal. I mean, you have the fresh water of the river that might make that less salty. You have Empire to the Gulf. You have Venice to the Gulf. You have the river, the Birdfoot. Very complicated. It's not easily understandable, and I'm not going to even try to explain it like I think I know anything. So it's totally different.
Weather, it's more weather dependent, I feel like, than Highway 1. If you have the wrong wind over there, it just can muddy the whole area up. It is relatively shallow from end to end. You have the river silt there. And when you do get a little bit of wind, it can make it more muddy than anything we're even used to on LA1. It can be 1 inch of visibility in the wrong area. So for that reason, that's why it's important to have a variety of areas to go to and species. Let's say you do catch 1 or 2 of the species in that dirtier water, and you need that third fish. Well, let's say it's a redfish. Let's say you've caught a trout, you caught a flounder down there at Joshua's. Great area. You're always going to have a chance at Joshua's to catch all 3. It's just such a good area right next to the Gulf, but it is weather dependent. If you have bad weather, it muddies up fast. You can fish right there in the cove, right by Joshua's, and catch the entire slam. But if you only catch 2 of the fish and you have to make a decision, hey, I need that redfish, man, if you go up north, there's spots where you can stop depending on how much time you have. You can go up and you can pull into the high school, but the problem is you may have to travel quite a ways to get to some ponds or something that maybe somebody else isn't in already. You have Grand Bayou Road is an excellent choice. You can go to Grand Bayou Road and you can hit some ponds that are really close by. That is a spot where you might be able to get that redfish. You're near a main channel, a lot of oysters, a lot of ponds off of it. You may be able to get a redfish there or a flounder. It's an excellent place for flounder. And then as you move up north, you have Lake Hermitage, of course, which just is not just the lake. That place has just so many different directions to go. And depending on what species you need, some directions are way better than just, hey, I'm gonna go to the lake. But hey, sometimes the lake has already been fished 10 times on the close banks. But you may go the other direction and find a pond no one's been in, and boom, 8-pound red. So, and then you got Myrtle Grove last. Now, talking about each area, Brendan, do you have any
Myrtle Grove is really like a good winter trout fishery. It's the dead end canal kind of fishery. It holds water early winter that's a lot warmer than the surrounding water temperatures, so that it kind of stacks up with trout. This for our tournaments, I wouldn't go to Myrtle Grove looking for trout. It's really a wintertime fishery for trout. It's really great for redfish. You have to paddle a ways out to get to the ponds, because you're basically paddling through all the camps until you get to the ponds, and then you're taking a left or taking a right or going over there. A lot of somewhat of a concern about private land property owners kicking you out. So it might be a wasted trip. You might go there and you might just get the day where somebody's kind of real being, finicky about their property and boot you out, and there's nothing really you can do. It's kind of the daily struggle that we all have fishing Louisiana. We all know the places that are more likely to get, somebody angry at us, and, there's not that many signs out there though right now, after the hurricane. So
what about further south for the trout when you're heading towards Yellow Cotton Bay and Empire? And
well, yeah, we're going to progress down. Okay, so that's just touching on Myrtle Grove. I would say that's a great redfish area. Lots of aquatic grass, lots of nice ponds.
And because of the timing of the tournament, Myrtle Grove really comes into play. It might be a good place, especially if we have a lot of weather, a lot of wind, where you can launch pre-tournament, because you can launch early this tournament. 12 midnight?
Yeah.
Right. Not that I'm going to launch at 12 midnight, but hey, if you want to, go ahead. If you want to launch at 5 in the morning and do all that paddling pre-cast before it's legal casting time, Myrtle Grove is an ideal place where you can cover that water, get into an area, and as soon as you can start to see if you can catch that redfish early, you may catch a flounder right off that little channel, and you may come back to the marina and catch a smaller trout. I've never caught any giant trout at Myrtle Grove in the last couple of years. Years ago, there used to be 4-pounders there. So there may still be some larger fish there, but typically they're a little bit on the smaller side. But hey, guess what? You just might have caught a slam. Then you might have the rest of the day to upgrade. And then as you go down the coast, are there any spots, like
Bayou log
Empire,
cabins would be
like
next.
log cabins? Yeah.
So, a lot of the club tournaments have been out of Bayou log cabins or the Lake Hermitage area. Championship. It's a wonderful location. It's got big open bays that are, bigger than bays. And then there's, nice deep canals. There's nice redfish ponds. There's grass, but you got to find it. There's oysters, but they're scattered. A lot of the land has changed. I mean, I think when we went to championship last time, like half of the land was deposited in the middle of the lake. So
islands.
So it's weird to see all that change where you used to go, around a smooth lake shoreline with scattered shells and a nice hard bank to fish, and now you're going through kind of a sponge-like marsh system that's different. So you kind of have to relearn it. So that's fun, but it's we have a constantly changing estuary here in Louisiana. By the time y'all are taking your kids or your grandkids, it's going to be different. That's right. It's a great place to catch all three, I think, and I think it's one of the best places to catch all three.
So Ian Gillespie has a question. If you had to pick one bait to throw for a chance to catch all three species, what would it be this time of year?
Plastic.
Jig. Yeah, plastic.
Okay.
Yeah, shrimp-colored plastic.
Shrimp-colored plastic.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be brown shrimp palooza. I mean, I don't know, this time of year. I mean, all the fish are eating those little brown shrimp,
and we look at the shrimp Creole color, the clear style baits. You can do really well on those baits on 23 and relatively medium to clean water. It doesn't have to be perfectly clean. You think, well, I've got to throw something super bright. You don't have to on 23. You really can catch a lot. It's surprising how many fish you can catch on a relatively clear bait. The shrimp Creole works good. That just comes to mind.
One of my early fishing trips, I was fishing pitch black at night. I used to fish a lot at night. And I was going out with kind of a smoky, clear, basically a clear. I mean, if you held it in your hand, you would notice it kind of, but not much. I was throwing that in the pitch black. I was catching trout about every 10 casts. I mean, they could see this thing in the dark. The water wasn't particularly clean. I think fish can see a lot better than we give them credit for.
Right. I've always liked Grand Bayou Road. I've always liked it because I felt like I could catch all three there. I have fished it for fall and tide because what I would do is launch, and that's another place where you can do the traveling before it's casting time, get to an area maybe you've scouted a pond or something, and get that early redfish and get that guy out of the way. And then I find that a springtime bite, you do have a really nice morning bite, but a lot of times you have a much later trout bite. So a lot of times I will try to target a redfish early. And then if my trout aren't cooperating, or I pass by a trout area and they're just not active or whatever, you'll get that redfish. And sometimes the redfish are more active in the morning and the trout are more active in the afternoon. So don't get too hung up on one species where you're going to sit there all day and waste too much time. Think more of, I like to think more trout in the afternoon, especially if it's a cool day. Now, again, it's front dependent. If you have a string of perfect weather, that morning bite is absolutely going to be great for trout and redfish.
What about flounder?
Flounder are just current. You really need to look at the tide. I just feel like when is my falling tide that is when I'm going to be looking for my flounder. If I got a falling tide sometime during that day, I want to catch that water coming out of something. Because here's the thing about flounder. If they find a nice little mud bottom, they'll push in, they'll get that mud over them, and they are completely covered. And they're just not even feeding, can't see anything, don't care. And then when the tide starts moving over them again, then they pop out, and then they're ready to, they'll do that swimming thing, and they'll start attacking stuff. So there are times when you can't make a flounder bite, so and those times to me would be real slow water or slack tide. Slack tides are also a good time to travel. If you have a slack tide, you're in an area, all right, everything's shut down. I've got one or two of the fish. Let's go. Find your slack tide during the day and strategize it so that, hey, I'm going to travel during that slack time. I'm going to
giving away too many good hits.
No, well, that's a good one though.
I know, it's a really good hit.
Travel during that slack time, and then wait till that tide starts falling. To answer your question, that's when I'm looking for the flounder. If it's not going to fall all day, then I'm just going to try to get lucky and just blow by everything that's got a little bit of moving water.
So further down would be, basically between Port Sulphur and Lake Hermitage, you have all those kind of small, really thick marsh areas, Magnolia, Grand Bayou Road, Happy Jack. They're all kind of the same kind of estuary system, that whole Grand Bayou branch estuary that is, if you look on the map, it's really one of the best places to get protected. If you have a really windy day, you want to find some clean water. That's probably the area with the most aquatic grass. You can really get in there. In March, I think you can really find marsh trout in there.
Absolutely.
Still. There's still going to be some nice fish in the marsh acting like redfish this time of year, especially if you get in there early before boats are going through it. They kind of get skittish, towards the end of the day unless they've been left alone in an area. That's to say, I've also caught my biggest trout this time of year at Paddlepalooza, probably at like 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock. I think one time me and Devin were fishing, and he saw me catch 2 like 4-pounders like back to back, and it was like at 1:30, and I was like, you never know. So throwing porkies in the afternoon on a sunny day in March. So I like March Paddlepaloozas. I'm really going to be, like Steve said, targeting trout in the morning and in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a fish that can give you some weight comparatively to some of the other fish. Catch that nice,
Gator.
7-8 pound red, and just call it a day. If you get one that's 6.5, call it a day. Move on. I mean, if you're in reds every cast, sure, catch the perfect red, but I don't think you want the 3-pound trout if you can.
Yeah, it's not worth
That's so much
spending
better.
all day on any one of the 3 species, unless you just feel like you want to win that category. And if you have something really special going on and you're into some 8-pound reds, it is absolutely, if that's what you want to do, it's absolutely worth it to try to get the biggest one you can to try to win a category fish. Winning a category fish is harder than it looks, because there's always a guy who brings one in that's 8.5. Say, well, I thought I had the biggest one, and it happens.
What would be y'all's target size for each of the species? Y'all mentioned that earlier. How do you
Once
know when to move on?
the fish that like I get and I call it quits.
Yeah.
Right. Any flounder. Let's start with that. Any legal flounder. I mean, at fall tide this year, the flounder fishing was so good. I literally caught 1 flounder, and then 2 casts later, I had another flounder. So it made me stop and flounder fish for a while, just in case there was a bigger one. There wasn't. They were all the same size, but I quickly moved on. Once I left that spot and I had a few flounder, I was like, I'm not going to waste time on flounder. I'm going to go try to catch other fish. Red, I mean, I'm not as, and this is probably Matt Keeley's heel as a slam fisherman, is I always like quit once I get like a 6-pound red and like I'm going fish for trout.
So like 24 plus, 24 inch.
25.
So because if you look historically, how many of these things have been won with 11 something, somewhere up in there. It doesn't always take the giant slam. Some years it does, but man, just a third place finish in this tournament with 6 or 7 pound total. It has happened so many times. So man, if you got 2 of the fish, move on. If they're decent size, just move on.
Pick your most confident way to get to 9 pounds.
Yeah.
And if it's plus or minus a little bit, so let the cards lay. But just if you can pick, divide 9 pounds by what you think it's going to take, try to push for that. And that's kind of what I always kind of go for. So
because all of you guys are here, I feel like everyone's interested in trying to do things to increase their success. But there's a lot of people who are going to give up about halfway in the day, and you guys just keep pushing on, and your chances just keep going up. You just stay with it, and you're going to have a much better chance than even some of the good anglers who have given up. And there will be good anglers who just are in their truck whining about their tackle their reel that backlashed because they didn't change their line.
A redfish caught in the morning is going to shrink a lot more than a redfish caught right before it's time to go to the weigh-in. You can probably have a redfish shrink at least a half an inch on a warm day. March, I would probably say if you have most of the day, I would say guaranteed quarter. So if you catch a 27 and a quarter, keep it.
Yeah,
especially if it's before 10.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Does anybody want to talk about any types of lures?
Wait. You want to keep going through the spots?
Spots, yeah. Let's do.
So
that's right. We didn't finish.
Port Sulphur. You're a Port Sulphur guy.
Yeah, I've been to Port Sulphur many times. You can go all kinds of directions to Port Sulphur. You can go right there in the pond, right by the launch, and there is lots of trout that are caught there. Albeit not always giants, but it doesn't take. One of my friends finished 3rd in this tournament.
Didn't leave that pond.
Everything was right there.
I don't know if it's the same friend, but I've had a friend that's also done that in that pond.
Yeah. So there are spots that are right there. Now, as you travel around that area, there's ponds that are right around just a mile away or something. Very reachable with any kayak, a paddler, someone who's got a good Hobie, one of them good, the pedal kind of Hobies that you can really go a long ways, like that. Yeah, one of those.
Just in case you viewers out there don't know what we're talking about.
So I towed a guy this weekend. He was paddling. The wind came up. He was 3 years ago was playing NCAA baseball. True story. This was Saturday. Really good kid. Really tried hard. Caught a few nice fish, but couldn't get in. I grabbed the front of him and I towed him in with the Hobie. So you can just travel so far, but it really is a game changer. It was equipment will make a big difference. Now, what other equipment is out there? We joke around about it, but there's a lot of other equipment out there that works for you, works for different people. So do your homework and see what works for you. If it's fish finders, if it's power poles, if it's whatever, those are all tools. But so Port Sulphur, I digress. So there was a time when we had an IFA tournament. I fished Port Sulphur because I had to. Wasn't by choice. I launched there and I said, well, I'm going to make the best out of this situation. And I hit the Freeport Canal and I go down it and I hit the first major area off to the right that had a little bit of depth. And I found where this intersection was. It was in the spring. It was this time of year. The reason why I bring it up is because it was exactly when this tournament is happening. Not the cleanest water, but I was throwing a little bitty shrimp imitation bait, 1 inch long, under a popping cork, because I just didn't think I could catch them with anything else. caught a 19-inch trout. Very surprising, but so there are some nicer trout. There used to be plenty of 3 and 4 pounders there, and there may be some that are there, especially with top waters and things like that. But you have the opportunity in those main channels on those edges for flounder, especially where you see an old pipeline canal. If you fish the ends of those old pipeline canals, right where they meet a bay or something, excellent area for flounder. And then a lot of people will go around the corner to the left, or go, I guess it's sort of southeast to the left instead of going right. You can go left. And there's a pile of rocks around the corner there. A lot of people fish there and have had success catching, redfish and flounder along those rocks. So Fort Sulphur's full of areas. It is just
Drifting the oyster flats.
the oyster flats out in the middle of that bay. Sometimes I know a guy who caught a flounder dragging a plastic while he was fishing, dragging a plastic just across a wide open area, and caught a really nice flounder. So that's another good tip too. If you want to drag a second lure behind, is it legal to do too? Yeah. So you can drag a second lure behind in the right situation. If you're fishing slow, all right, this is a good opportunity. Throw something behind you, let it pull, and you might pick up that second, or third fish that you need.
Especially cottonwood.
Cockahoe, excellent point, Chris. If you do want to bring live bait, I suggest a Kale hook. You're going to have less chance to get it hung up, or even a circle hook. The problem is, you will catch them on a small circle hook too, and you're not going to get hung up. You can throw a little small circle hook out with a Cockahoe on it and drag it behind in the worst oysters you can possibly find, and it will not get hung up. Kale hook get hung up some, but don't use a J hook. You're going to hang up and be frustrated.
If your cockahoe gets hung up with a circle hook, send your letters to Steve at P.O. Box. The next 2 spots are Empire and Joshua's. Basically, they're kind of the middle of Highway 23, the wide open areas that are right south of Port Sulphur. If you look on the map, you got all this really kind of tight marsh, and then you get to Bay Adams, and it's just open. And there's a few islands out there. There's a lot of oysters out there. It's probably the #1 oyster producing area in the state. You can see those poles out there. They mark the boundaries of oyster fields. Those are great places to drift and fish for trout. There's lots of riprap that lines the few islands and shorelines that are out there, because it gets so much wave action, because it's basically out in the open. It stays really clean. That's a really good thing about it, because there's not a lot of dirt out there. It's all oysters. So if you don't mind paddling in big water and you want some clean water, you can go out to those locations. Some of the areas out of Joshua's have those nice kind of big areas of marsh that are away from the shoreline. Those are getting smaller and smaller every year, but there's some nice redfish in those ponds that are out there. The shoreline is kind of getting devastated, and then they fix it, and then it gets devastated again. But there's a lot of marsh structures that they put out there. There's pipes, and you can fish in the harbor right there at Joshua's and do really well. I've caught flounder in the harbor. I've caught redfish in the harbor. I've caught trout in the harbor. Not all 3 in 1 year, but I've caught all my fish there before at some point or another. It's a great fishery.
Yeah, I tell you though, when I first started kayaking, my very first tournament I did was one of these 2, the bigger tournaments, was Fall and Tide. And I went out of Joshua's, went over to that big Pomodoro Island area. I went on the back side of it, and I found one little spot. It's gone now. He wrote it in, but it was just basically a cut in a small pond. I went right there, and it was the first time ever in my life that I caught 12 nice keeper redfish, not rat reds, 12 nice. I was measuring them in a row. I was like a dozen redfish in a row. Every cast I caught one, brought them in on a spoon. And so I just always remember that. And so the variety over there is unbelievable. if you know that area, you put some time into the Joshua's area, it has been won there more times than anywhere up and down the Highway 23 corridor. A major tournament's been won out of Joshua's.
The next area would be the Yellow Cotton Bay launch. That's what's the street
The
name?
pumping station down there.
Duvik Pumps.
Duvik, yeah.
Duvik Pump Road,
Yeah.
and there's an honor box there. You put your $10 in the box and you launch. And there's a long canal to get out there. If you stay at Yellow Cotton
Cabins.
If you stay at the Yellow Cotton Bay cabins, you can launch on their little bridge right into Bay Karen Crow. If you don't want to paddle down the canal, but the canal's great. I've caught a lot of fish in that canal. There's the great thing about that area, I would say, is it's got the most roseau cane to fish out of any of the spots. There's a lot of open water, just like Empire and Joshua's, but the few banks that they do have a lot of nice cane to fish.
A lot of variety there.
Yeah, a lot of variety.
Yeah.
There's grass, there's open, there's.
Yeah. And lastly, down the road, you have the off the road stuff on the old Tidewater Road. There have been years where some adventurous anglers have tried going down the river, some of the river channels and all. I don't recommend that. I've wasted a lot of time doing that. Crew boats will come by and just about kill you over there. So not really worth it. We're trying to have fun, not getting ourselves in a real bad situation. They run these airboats now, and they didn't do this years ago, but now they run these airboats one after another right off the canes. So you're trying to stay out of the boat lanes, and an airboat comes around the corner and will tag you. So I would avoid that. But on the Tidewater Road area, on that rock, that bay out there has had some beautiful redfish. Has actually had the largest trout in fall and tide one year, and the winning fall and tide stringer came right there, right out along those canes there in that bay. And where
all the cypress trees are?
No, on the left, along the edges of that roseau cane over there on the left, south side. But you have redfish there, and you absolutely have flounder along that road. You have them along those canes. So, hey, I mean, I know they did some work down there and they kind of blocked some of it in. That may have helped to clean it up. I don't know. So, there's that might be worth investigating. But from end to end, Highway 23, I would say is more weather dependent, but it has the potential for really nice flounder and heavier reds. And hey, I mean, really bigger stringers come out of 23 than LA1 on average. So
I think our slam record is maybe 13 and a half pounds before they added the bonus pound down that way. So pretty impressive stringer.
So thoughts on the changes to the east side? Is it inbound?
East side is inbound, I think.
There's a lot more diversion. There's a lot more fresh water.
There's a lot of bass and vegetation on that side. You're kind of get choked up in some of those ponds piling out, but the redfish can be really heavy.
A lot of alligators.
A lot of alligators over there.
Yeah.
I know about 5 years ago, it was really a good play because you could catch a really good right redfish over there. But these days, I don't know. I mean, I just feel like they've run so much fresh water through there. The big Mardi Gras cut, I just don't think it's worth it.
And it's a lot of combat launches where you're like parking on the road and you're dragging. Dragging over the levee.
Yeah, Betchels and that pumping station down there are the main two I can think of.
What's that, like Four Horsemen drag over area and where that camp road is. If you look on the satellite, you can kind of see these kind of canals that come up to the levee where you basically park on the levee, put your wheels on your kayak and kind of roll over.
I guess my question was really, do you think there's any opportunity to catch trout over there this time of year?
I wouldn't make a paddle out to like first, second, third bay or something like that unless you scouted it first.
Right.
I would make sure that you have some salty water over there before.
We fished a redfish tournament over there and throw in a spinnerbait with a gold blade on it and trying to catch a redfish in dirty water, boom, hit a big trout. I mean, just out of the blue. So it might be an out of the blue trout, but I don't think it's worth the time to focus on them. But if I was there, I would maybe go for an upgrade if I've already caught the big red. But the only reason I would go there is for the red.
I mean, Reggio has some of the biggest trout in the March. So
yeah, the Reggio is
conversely,
excellent.
It could be a situation like that if the right water was in it, but you'd have to really see beforehand.
All right. Well, does
I think
anybody
that's
have
it.
any questions on anything we can help with? Just feel free to speak up. Or
Where does Brendan catch his big trout?
I like to fish over oysters with corkies.
I think the question was where.
You can try to follow me out of the parking lot if you want. I mean, lots of different locations, but usually somewhere between a far paddle and a far paddle.
Early March, there'll be some big trout out there. You think?
Yeah, I mean it's all dependent upon where I fish, the river level. So, I mean, I like to look at those satellite images before I go fishing. Like you can kind of get the bird foot, and you see like that big dirt wad kind of coming out. And if you see sometimes there's a little clear pocket, you're like, okay, I'll go fishing here. And then sometimes you just see it's like brown, like all the way up to Port Sulphur, and you're like, all right, I'm just going fish up in Hermitage for my trout.
yeah. So weather dependent. More weather dependent than anywhere.
River dependent.
Keep an eye on the river level.
It's low right now, thankfully. So hopefully we'll keep that going. And I mean, sometimes I really like to look at the satellite images because you can have some areas that are just completely dirty, and there'll be like a pocket of like clean water, and you're like, all the fish are trapped here. It's awesome.
How often do they update those satellite images on?
I mean, I think you can pay for some of the nice ones. I just go to the NASA one, and you just kind of zoom in and hope it's not a cloudy day, or you like backtrack as many days until it's not a cloudy day.
Right.
So.
Where do you get the $5 line? You said you spent $5.
They send line to Steve. So
I haven't bought any in a while, so maybe misspoken there.
you means like a third of a spool.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you buy 300 yards of braid and it's $20, divide that by 4 fill-ups.
Yeah.
That's five.
He just cuts off the top third of his line and splices. We'll make this work.
So yeah, pretty close. Huh?
Any other questions, y'all? Travis got one.
Okay, for live shrimp and cockatoos, is there a good place to go other than by Lake Hermitage?
I don't buy live
buy 'em?
bait, so I could not tell
Delta
you.
Marina.
Delta.
Delta, that's right. Delta.
Delta.
Yeah.
I don't know if,
What about
Myrtle Grove.
What about
Fralix is
I don't think, I haven't seen.
Fralix is not open.
What you want to do though is you want to call them before, like, so Myrtle Grove usually sells live bait, High Log Cabins, but that's a trip down that road. Delta sells live bait, maybe down in Venice, some of those marinas. So you really want to call them first to make sure they have what you want.
If you're gonna be there for a few days, bring a cooler and a 110 bubbler and go find them while you're down there before the tournament.
Yeah.
Keep them alive.
Go buy them at the captain's meeting at Delta. Bring them with you. Put them in the water where you stay.
Yeah, it may be hard to find live shrimp that time of year,
right?
At 5 o'clock in the morning.
especially.
But I'm gonna tell you though, if you
Cast net,
find
rabbit food.
yeah, that's it. But if you downsize and find you a small little shrimp imitation, the little tiny sparkle beetles actually are some of the best little small baits. I mean, they work really good. It's overlooked, but the little small sparkle beetles are excellent.
So you throw that on.
Yes,
medium
I mean-
height on a, like,
Yeah,
How about your setup for throwing that bait?
yeah. Put a little small sparkle beetle, 16th ounce jig head. Depending on the water depth, if you're in 3 foot of water, go with a 2 foot leader, an 18-inch leader, light line, and like 15 pound. You really don't need the heavy stuff for that. And I actually like, I didn't bring one, but if it's calm, this is the way I look at it. If it's calm, I'm not throwing a 4 horseman cork. I'm going to throw that little tiny clip on, and I'm going to just roll it around. I'll toss that little light bait up there. If you think about it, some of the guys who fly fish, is anybody fly fish. If you're fly fishing and you're making that right cast in there and it pops on the water, sometimes you'll spook that fish. There's a lot of times when you don't want the big goo goo, that's going to spook them. There are times when it works great. So if it's a little bit calmer, I'll put on that little clip-on cork, a little tiny small sparkle beetle, and I'll pitch it around some areas. Boom. I can't tell you how many times I've caught like a 20-inch trout doing that. So don't be afraid to use a smaller lure, 15-pound loop knot. I like to throw a loop knot on that so the bait it's real free, moves around. And hey, before the bait really gets in there, you'll see this bait explosion when you hit those right days. You hit about, in that 60 something, 70 degrees, you'll see little, after that, you'll see little big schools of pogies, little small ones. And you'll see the bait progressing like that. But before it's there, I think we're going to hit it before the bait explosion. And I think we're going to have a time when they're going to hit the artificial really well.
This is the east side of the town.
There you go. So a topwater frog, yeah, that's right. So yeah, that is my answer to before the bait really blows up. They're going to hit artificials better than they do any time of the year. So don't be afraid to throw plastic after your trout.
I think one of the first times me and Sean went fishing, we were throwing corkies and stuff all day. Caught some nice trout, and then Sean catches the biggest trout of the day with a voodoo about this big.
The voodoo. That's what it was
Under a poppet cork.
escaping me, but I was
And
trying
it
to
was
think of
this
the
time
name
of year.
The very tiniest little voodoo is deadly before the bait blows up, because they're looking for little small bait, and man, they just crush it. So other lures that work good, my favorites, I like mirrodines. One of my favorites. Sean knows I like to throw mirrodine.
I like spinner baits in March.
Spinner baits,
It's a little breezy.
Mm-hmm. You get a little, just like bass fishing. Anybody been bass fishing lately? I don't know. Maybe. Could be one or two of us. It could be one or two of us who have caught a 9-pounder lately. I don't know. But it's same kind of thing. Let's say you find a nice little area with a ripple across it, and a swim bait too. And actually, Brendan has one on there.
Yeah, what kind of swim bait is that, Brendan?
I brought one here.
I like this one because it's really soft and it collapses around the weedless hook.
So
That's from Tackle Warehouse.
Tackle Warehouse.
So here's another example. Also with the little, this is the owner flashy. You have the little flash here, and you have that situation, Jonathan, where you have that little ripple across an area, and hey, I don't see anything. Maybe it's going to be too much trouble to throw and try to cover all this, but I can cover slash with something like this. Cover that water real fast, but I do like a little wind.
Steve, can you hold it up a little bit closer to the camera so people can see what we're doing
Absolutely.
here? Yeah. And
Does it
and
focus?
hold it. Yeah, it's fine. And hold it to the side so they can see how it would run through the water.
Okay, like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, you have your little flashy below. These are good baits to cover water.
That was what we had for minimums, right? That
No.
we were getting the time.
That was what it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Oh,
So we actually
flashy.
had. So everybody knows we actually had that ordered, and it came in for minimalist after the tournament. Unfortunately, due to back
This
order.
time of year, your little tiny shrimp imitations, little small shrimp, can be deadly. And this is a lot of people will think of this as a small fish bait. This time of year, not necessarily. And then when you have those cold days, that is when these little guys shine.
The tsunami.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this style of bait
Yep.
really does well with the cold. If we do happen to have a cold front that comes through and you find a clear, now that's the only thing about these. I don't like throwing them in dirty water. I like to throw these in a medium to a clean water situation, deeper. I'm not bothering throwing this in shallow water, but I know some of my friends swear by them in 2 foot of water. I just like this in a deeper water situation when it's cold.
I was fishing in Happy Jack one year. It was for fall and tide, but it was in the fall. And we were fishing a canal, not catching anything. There was a bank fisherman. He had one rod. He had a oyster sack, and he was catching trout after trout and just putting him in his oyster sack to go in. I was talking to him later on. He showed me that he was fishing with that particular bait, that tsunami swim bait.
Yeah.
And it was incredible
So
bait.
They have a time when they really shine. I know some people like Mr. Tommy. He likes to use it year round, and they do work. They work year round. But I just feel like the time of year when they're the best is when it's cold and you have a little bit deeper water.
Chuck.
What did Chuck say?
He says he won $14,000 on that bait last year for the Power Pole Championship.
What, the tsunami?
I guess the tsunami. Yeah.
Okay, well, good. Hey, Chuck knows.
I like to use chicken on a chain, or what I really like to do is the 14 karat gold mama and dip it into the glow sauce, so it's not quite as bright as chicken on the chain, but it's like a subtle version of chicken on the chain.
So anybody who's a red fisherman may have heard from some of the past red fishermen and got advice from them that, oh yeah, when it's wintertime, gold spoon really works good. I find that if you're going to throw something gold, like this little spinnerbait here, I do find that they work better in a little bit colder water. And, I was talking about the oysters. It's just almost, this and a jig, you run these over and you have a really good chance of covering and covering around oysters and then getting one to come up and smack it. That the gold, I really feel like works good this time of year. Summertime, maybe not as good, I don't feel like, and I like my crawfish pattern. I like my weedless bait in more of a summer pattern, but these may come into play. Look, tips and tricks if you're gonna, a lot of people still like the spoon. If you're gonna throw a spoon, there's some things that I like to do. I put me a small swivel with a split ring on there and make it where I don't have line twist. But also one of my things I got from our bass fishing, I've done this for several years. I actually showed this to Casey, and Casey has been using this for a long time. When you have those real windy days and you want to throw a small spoon and you feel like it's the right lure for you in that day, but that wind is just preventing you from, you throw it, you know how to want to buzz off 10 feet from your target? Put you a tungsten weight or bass tungsten weight, slide it on your line down, and it'll just slide down your line in front of that bait. It'll make it cast so much better, and it'll still work in the water just the same. So put a little tungsten weight. That's my tip of the.
What weight?
That's like a 3/16.
Or
so
you get
small.
the lid tape and you just put it on the inside of it. If you don't want it to look wonky like it does with a big swivel in front of it. I'm like anti-swivel guy. But he's a better fisherman than me, so listen to him.
I'm sort of maybe. So the swivel on the front, I do not think bothers a redfish one bit.
I don't think
so. We're not trout fishing. We're not trout fishing. So trout fishing, hey, natural, something that has a shrimp, some kind of a profile, a bait fish profile. It just works really well this time of year. That's for our variety. Okay, yeah. So
this is one of my favorites.
Brendan was talking about porkies and jerkbaits. So we didn't mention jerkbaits a lot, but that's my middle. These are my middle of the water column guys. So Miradine, I typically change the hooks. These are the Gamakatsu makes a new saltwater hook.
Tell me
The
about it.
These are really nice. The weight of the wire is good. I never have any trouble with them anymore. So I always change my Myrtles out with these new hooks. I think it still falls nice, still has a nice little wobble. And then you have your jerk baits.
They're super sharp.
Those baits are immaculate.
Well, yeah.
My
You
baits look so
Oh,
dirty.
everybody asks me, and Doug asks me that all the time. So why do my baits all look so good? Look, okay, let me show you one here.
He polishes.
No. Dang, I didn't bring the other one. So this top water is getting tore up. So I've obviously used it a bunch. Got some hook rash on it and everything, but my hooks have very little rust. Now this is a hook that will rust. This is a Gamakatsu hook here. It will rust, but it has a little bit on it. I use those blue anti-rust clips, those little pieces, and I just drop them in all my trays. Drop them in everything, and then I take my tackle. When I'm done, I bring my tackle in the conditioned house in a closet is where I put my stuff. I don't leave it outside in the weather. But the little blue tabs help to keep the rust off of your baits. Really does work.
What about gulp this time of year?
This is the time of year when I really don't use a lot of gulp. I find that I have been red fishing before, and they don't bite a gulp any better than a plain plastic. I don't know why. They don't. If they can see it and they're going to eat, they just eat almost any plastic you can present to them, put it right in front of them. That's what I've experienced. I just find when it gets, the hotter it gets, the better gulp works. I don't think it's a cold water bait. I mean, I'm going to bring a few. Now, flounder, I'm going to bring them for flounder because flounder is kind of the exception, but for redfish and for trout, I'll bring them again, but it's not my first choice.
If you're too lazy to go get the live cockatoos, bring the gulp.
Bring them. Another thing that Brendan talks about being subtle. Now, this one is a bright bait, bright bait. But I brought it because just so you can see it well. You can take a lure that you have.
Can you show it to the camera?
Yeah. And you can scrape a lot of bass fishermen do this a lot for their top waters. What they'll do is they'll scrape the bright paint off and leave it on just one spot towards the head. And what that allows, what that's supposed to do is it gives them that target towards the head to strike. But a lot of the bass fishermen take and they'll scrape it down till it's clear, and they'll throw that after your schooling bass. I brought this one just because it's kind of bright. If you take a top water and you can scrape the paint off, that is something that the bass guys do. I think it makes it look more natural. I think a brand new shiny top water out the pack doesn't work as well as after they get beat up. I think they work better when they start getting beat up and chewed up for whatever reason.
One of my good friends in Texas is really amazing at trout tournaments. They do these like big catch and release trout tournaments where they go and catch these 7-pounders and stuff. And it's live weigh in. It's awesome. He swears by red fingernail polish and making a dot on the bottom of your top waters to give that fish something to like zone in on. He has tried different things like where he paints like gills, but he wants to give, and y'all have seen the top waters where they have like a bright red throat or something, but he just like, for whatever reason, the ones he likes don't have that red throat on them. So he like paints just like a little circle right in the middle of the belly, right by that hook.
And if you see, Miradine has that red right on the tip already from the factory. It's a given. The Tsunami, if you look at the profile on the side, has the red on the head right there. Just a target. I don't know. Seems to work. I'll just go with it. Any other questions? Sean, so you like a topwater?
I love a topwater, but I don't think I got one topwater bite all year. I don't know what it was. It's crazy.
I went last Saturday. I did not get a single topwater bite, but guess what I did? I made the transition, and I used the middle and the bottom lures and caught a lemon.
Yeah, we went 3 weeks ago into Leeville, and I was using Miradine. I forget what you were using. Jig, and we were catching some really nice trout. 16 to 19.
Yeah.
somewhere around there. We caught a limit between the two of us.
Yeah.
Nothing on top water.
Nothing on top
Nothing on
water.
top
Not a
water. There's a
bite.
time when they want to shy away from different lures, and that's why I always say you go to a nice key area, top, middle, bottom, give them a chance to show you what they want. All right, guys,
I think that's it.
Next questions?
listening.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it's
Thanks,
8 o'clock. Hey, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Brendan. We are going to be putting this onto a podcast so that you should be able to access it on your app, on the podcast app.
Yeah.
So should have that out fairly soon. We're going to wrap it up, guys. Thanks for joining us tonight. Look forward to seeing you guys out there on the water here in a couple of weeks.
Oh.